Welcome back to Yoshi Entertainment, everybody. So, unfortunately, as we all know, recently Hurricane Helene came through and absolutely messed up Florida. It's really sad. If you've ever had to live through a hurricane or evacuate and come back to your house being in shambles or your house being flooded, you understand what some of these people are going through. For the southern states that are around the Gulf, that are around the coast, that area where there are usually hurricanes that come, if you live down in that area, then you know whenever they say it's hurricane season, everybody gets nervous because we know at any point in time between early June and late November, a hurricane can just come and mess up everybody's plans, have people out here gone, deceased, missing. It's real bad. If you've never experienced a hurricane, let me tell you once again, it's real bad. Now, Hurricane Helene, everybody in Florida, they knew, it was coming. They were like, okay, we're preparing, we're getting ready, we're doing what we have to do. If I'm not mistaken, it was a Category 3. And then not long before it hit landfall, it was a Category 4. And again, if you are familiar with this, you know that hurricanes, at any point in time, they could be going in one direction. We call ourselves trying to track and whatnot. And I thank God for all the people on the news, all the technology that we have now to be able to track hurricanes. Although, at any point in time, that hurricane could be going in one direction. Within the hour, it could shift, and now somebody else is in danger. Somebody else who was like, oh, I'll just be on the outskirts, and didn't quite prepare, didn't buy enough water, didn't make sure they had a generator. And that's for people who can even afford to do those things. And we'll talk about that later. But at any point in time, that hurricane can shift, and now a whole new section of the state is at risk of danger, of fatal danger. People don't actually think, especially in places who don't experience hurricanes, that you could literally get deleted by a hurricane. Especially if you're in the center of where it's striking, depending on the wind damage, like the wind from hurricanes can literally knock down houses. The flooding, there are people who have drowned, even who could swim in the flooding that has been brought by hurricanes. Because people keep forgetting that you could still get trapped under stuff and then get flooded over. There's still cars under the water. There's still stuff your foot could get stuck in. It is my understanding that this is what happened essentially to North Carolina. God help North Carolina because those people did not see this coming. They don't have the same things in their state going on to really foresee hurricanes like the southern coastal states do. They weren't even warned that this was going to happen. Allegedly, there are 44 people recorded. I know that there's probably more, unfortunately, who are deceased now because they didn't even see this hurricane coming. They just thought it was going to go through Florida and just be done with it. But apparently, like I said, there must have been one of them ships I was talking about earlier. And somehow it went up. It went through Florida and then it went up and it hit North Carolina. And there are a lot of people who are completely devastated by what has happened. Different counties, different cities. There are people missing. There are people deceased. Allegedly, there was one article talking about how a baby had to be flighted to a hospital because of injuries sustained during this time. Thousands of people are without power. And I quote, Asheville, a mecca for artists and a popular tourist destination, found itself isolated by the storm's effect. Electricity and cell service cut off. Roads and bridges in ruins. Cars and trucks submerged, end quote. People don't always think about this kind of stuff. That sometimes, and I've seen this happen with a hurricane as well, the flooding will be so horrendous that there will be bridges in and out of cities that are completely covered. And then, God forbid, the worst thing that happened, the bridge will collapse. Now, of course, people will have motorboats that they use to either transport people to and fro, help rescue people who might not have been able to evacuate because they just didn't have the money. But even once the water drains down, now you've got to deal with the bridge being broken. How do you, like I said, I've been through a hurricane to that extent before where there had to be entire detours that we had to take for weeks because of that kind of stuff. And it wasn't just, the bridge is a little bit broken. No, first we had to wait, like I said, until the water went down. That took weeks in itself. Then we had to wait until they fixed the bridge. So there was somebody that was talking about, we'll talk about later on, who was saying this is not going to take months to fix. This is going to take years to fix. Like, you don't just fix this overnight. People tend to forget that after these kind of situations are no longer in the headlines, the people who were the victims of it still have to deal with it. A month after this, 2 months after this, during Christmas time, people will be celebrating, not remembering that the people of North Carolina are still dealing with this. There were people who got hit by Harvey 2 years after the fact. This was during a pandemic, mind you, where they were still dealing with, I need FEMA to help me get a new house. My house has still been flooded out. The walls have molded. They've been living in hotels or with other family members, still needing help and assistance. It takes years. Again, in Asheville, there was a resident that was basically saying that they didn't know what they were going to do concerning drinking water. And I quote, "We're all rationing," he said. "There is no water to boil. Taps are totally dry," end quote. Because I know there was somebody probably thinking, just drink the tap, even though tap water is really not clean, y'all. And that's not a conspiracy theory. That's the truth. They can't even do that. Even if they wanted to take a pot and put it over the sink and get water that way, to just boil it just to be safe, they still can't do it because the taps have run dry. And I quote, he said some people are using pond water to flush toilets in an effort to maintain some level of sanitation, end quote. A man by the name of John Finley, who lives outside of Asheville, was expressing his concern about the power, because that's another thing, once again, people have to deal with. The power outages. Sometimes breaker boxes get knocked off. They get destroyed, get flooded out. They have transformers that get messed up because the pole that they're on, like somebody's car could have been floating down the street, hits the pole, knocks the pole in half, and now the transformer has hit the ground and it's broken or it's busted open. It's non-functional. And then you'll have wires laying on the ground with the pole they were attached to, once again, because of the winds. The winds are snapping the poles and trees in half, and the trees are falling on the lines, causing the poles they're attached to fall. It's all kind of stuff that happens. And then the power is out. So now you got to deal with power outages. It's in the summer, usually in these deep south states, which is another unfortunate thing. And usually these hurricanes hit whenever it's like peak summer heat, or it's coming a little bit off of the summer heat into like the fall, but it's still hot down there in the south. And this is really bad, especially for people who are at risk, like older people or the young individuals, like children. Like, you could literally get a heat stroke in your own house, depending on how hot it is, after the power has gone out. It's hot. People are uncomfortable. They're unhappy. They're going through it. You're losing fluids because you're sweating constantly and you can't do anything. Some people have a generator, but they've got to be very selective with what they choose to run on the generator because you're using power. And unless you have money to keep putting that gas in there, somebody's going to be without something. So, like I said, they got to be selective with what they choose to run on the generator. When the power goes out, whether you have evacuated or not, if you have food that's perishable in your icebox, you can kiss all that goodbye. Once again, I've been through hurricanes before. There have been times where we have had to evacuate for weeks, came back, everything in the icebox had to go because the power outage lasted so long that the stuff went bad. And the last thing you need to be without in these kind of situations is food to spare. Anyways, this guy was talking about, and I quote, "You can't have water without power," he said. "While he has access to well water, we have no power to run pumps," end quote. Like I said, it's a very awful situation to be in, and one problem leads to another. No power, no water, no electricity. Can't keep your food, stored the way it's supposed to in the icebox. Some people will resort to trying to get ice, but again, if you have no power, where are you going to keep the ice from melting? You can put it inside of a cooler, but again, that's only going to last for so long. And as if the ice that you get to is not already melted, because in the store where it was, if you can get to a store to buy it, the power probably went out there too. And if they didn't have a backup generator right on hand to try and solve that, you're up the creek essentially. This is why they tell people, for anybody who's curious because you haven't been through this situation before and you want to know, this is why they tell people when there's a hurricane coming, don't panic buy, because there's still people who need resources as well. But make sure you have reasonable amounts of water in your house. Unfortunately, you probably will have to ration, okay? Everybody gets 1 bottle of water a day. Point period blank. Don't waste it. They also tell you to stack up on toiletries, but also be very sparing, so to speak. Don't be going to the bathroom 1,000 times if you can control it. Be careful. Sit down somewhere, read a book. You know what I'm saying? Like, just don't be using up resources just to be using it up. And they also say to buy non-perishables. Stack up on MREs if you can, because when the power goes out, you're going to need those non-perishables that don't depend on power or to be put in the refrigerator. You're going to need those. Now, there have been people within the community, organizations that have been getting together, setting aside facilities to basically stack water up. There have been people from other states, other places, even within North Carolina that may not have been affected as much, who have been sending resources down there. It's very beautiful to see how humanity can come together during these kind of times of natural disaster. There have been a lot of people, they've been putting together money and sending it down there to get people resources and have facilities, like I said, set aside for people who could not evacuate, who got to get out of their houses because it's either been flooded out and they can't stay in there, or it's been completely demolished by this hurricane. So they get down there to those facilities where they can stay to have some kind of like housing, etc. Once again, I've been through the same thing. I can say that I do understand. There was a hurricane that came. My family and I went to a facility like that where they had, cots laid out. There was even a place for people's pets. And you just have to stay there until it's safe to go back home until you can. A lot of times churches will get together. I've seen that as well. They will have like food drives where they'll have people and they'll say, come out, during this time, on this day, we'll give you a case of water, some non-perishables, etc. Like, peanut butter, canned goods, and they'll help the community. Like I said, it's good to know that stuff is going on, because that's definitely something that the people of the community over there in North Carolina really, really need right now. And I quote, "Mobile medical units from other parts of the state were flying to hard-hit areas equipped with bottled water and Gatorade," said Jonathan Collier, Vice President of Mobile Medical at Atrium Health in Charlotte. Those units were returning with the most fragile patients, including premature babies, heart attack and stroke victims, and people with traumatic injuries. Again, people don't think about these things. Like I said before, there are people who are at risk where their health is concerned. They have extreme health concerns. There are babies, children. Imagine all the women who were pregnant at the time, especially the women who were about to give birth. Like, imagine if there was a woman out there who had to deal with all of this, flood waters rising, house falling down, trees getting knocked over, and she's about to go into labor. Like this, channel that I have, it stands for many things. And one of those things is empathy towards other people. Being mindful of what's going on in other parts of the world that you are privileged at the moment to not be going through. Now, there was a county sheriff by the name of Quentin Miller who put some words out there, and I quote, "I don't know that we can ever properly prepare for everything. This was new to all of us. This is stretching us in places that we didn't know." Miller said, "To say this caught us off guard would be an understatement," end quote. And this goes also for all those people, because I also saw this on social media. We'll talk a little bit more about this later. There are people literally calling these people all kind of names, everything except for their government names they don't even know, and a child or children of God, because they didn't evacuate, because they weren't prepared. How in the world are you going to evacuate and prepare for a storm you didn't even know was on its way to your state? But like I said, we're going to talk about that a little bit more later. This article goes on to state that there were tens of thousands of people who had taken pictures of the destruction right in front of their own homes and in their own neighborhoods. And I quote, "Homes swept away, refrigerators and other appliances floating in muck, restaurants and coffee shops pummeled to pieces, dazed locals wandering through streets lined with debris, residents surveying damage as they paddled in kayaks in murky brown floodwaters alongside inundated rooftops," end quote. Apparently, there were certain historic attractions that were ruined by these floodwaters due to this hurricane, the historic village of Biltmore. And I quote, a popular attraction at the entrance of the Biltmore Mansion was plunged underwater. The estate, built during the first Gilded Age, regularly draws throngs of visitors, end quote. That's another thing people don't consider. The historic places, buildings, objects that can be ruined. We didn't have them for years. Ruined literally overnight, in a couple of hours, by a natural disaster. Buncombe County's Director of Communications told the news outlets what it was like returning back to her home. I'm assuming she left whenever she saw everything getting bad, or she probably was out working and then couldn't get back home because things had gotten so horrible. And when she finally was able to get back home, it was absolutely horrible. And I quote, I went home last night for the first time since the storm hit, and I live in Black Mountain, and to say it's decimated would be an understatement. Roads are so impassable, so we're having to fly materials in, take other routes, end quote. Unfortunately, some of these cities are almost practically isolated now because of the floodwaters, the broken bridges, because of how, like she said, decimated the routes to and out of the city are. Like she said before, it's very, very messed up. That's very, very sad to leave your house one way and then come back and it be gone, decimated, ruined. And it was all completely out of your control. The owner of a guitar bar in Asheville had some words. He said, and I quote, he feared his business was effectively destroyed. It's not only months of recovery, he told NBC affiliate, it's years, end quote. And once again, what people don't think about is the money. Where these people are going to get the money. Like, it doesn't fall out of the sky. They can apply for loans, grants, etc. But there are still people, like I said, from previous hurricanes who never got the help that they needed. Now, the president, Joe Biden, made some kind of statement saying that he was going to try to get down there to visit the community. But they need more than a visit. They need monetary aid. They need help. They need food. They need resources. They need their houses to be rebuilt. They need construction companies down there being paid, preferably by the government, to move out all the debris so that they can get back to rebuilding. And they don't need to be coming out of their own pockets to doing it. These people need it done by the government, by him. Now, he made some kind of raggedy behind statement, and yes, I'm calling it a raggedy behind statement. And I quote, Biden added that he may call a special session of Congress to address the hurricane's devastation, but that no decisions have been made yet, end quote. He may call a session, and that no decisions have been made yet? What is that supposed to mean? There are people suffering. There are people that need help. They need resources. They need food and water. Their children are starving. Their children are not in a good place. There are people who are sick and have issues, health issues. They need help. There should be no question as to whether or not they're going to deliberate on what they should or should not do. Once again, they don't need a visit from the president. They need help. This is why I keep saying don't put your faith and trust in the government. Now, it could be more than just him. It could be the other branches of the government that people like to conveniently forget about. They could be saying, well, we're not in North Carolina. Ain't none of our family members over there. We didn't get hit by a hurricane, so why should we care? Once again, don't put your faith and your trust in these governments. Demand that they do what they're supposed to do because they're the government, but don't put anything past them. Anyways, there was a situation that this article called attention to. Trigger warning, this is very heartbreaking. I'm going to be real honest with y'all. And I quote, Jessica Dry Turner took to Facebook on Friday begging for someone to rescue 4 of her family members stranded on the roof of their home in Asheville. And I quote, they are watching 18-wheelers and cars floating by, she wrote. Before help could arrive, the roof collapsed, Turner said in a subsequent face post Saturday that her elderly parents and 6-year-old nephew had drowned. I've never felt this kind of loss, devastation, and aching of my spirit, she wrote, end quote. Once again, people have to realize that there are people going through things that a lot of us would not be able to fathom. To them, this is probably like they've been saying apocalyptic type event. This, like I said, the people of North Carolina who got hit by this did not see this coming. They did not have the procedures in place like the people in the South, because the people in the South deal with this kind of thing often. So they did not see it coming. You heard many people say that they were blindsided, that they were taken off guard was an understatement. It's like they were doing fine one moment and the next, all hell was breaking loose. There have been so many people who are now deceased, gone because of the things that happened. Again, like, you can do everything that you can and still things can go wrong. Now, there is a picture, if I'm not mistaken, of that particular woman and her family. And this was moments before this particular thing happened, which is really sad and quite disturbing, very disturbing when you really think about it. We'll get into it a little bit later. Now, as I said before, there were some people who took to Twitter and other social media websites to basically gather these people by all of their 3 brain cells who are out here saying that these people, why didn't they evacuate? Why didn't this? Why didn't that? Reminding them that they didn't even see it coming. This young lady on Twitter wrote, and I quote, "People who keep saying that Appalachia should have been prepared for this really know nothing about the area or whether this wasn't a once-in-a-lifetime thing. This was this has never happened since Noah kind of thing. It's one thing to live below sea level and have this happen. It's a whole other to literally live in the mountains and have your home washed away or have water covering your house. People had less than a day's warning of how bad it might be, and nothing said it would be this bad. On the coast, people know a week ahead what will likely happen because it happens all the time. It's not the same," end quote. And that's very true. On the coast, the southern coast, they be knowing ahead of time. They be knowing more than a week ahead of time. Whenever those hurricanes are forming in the Gulf out there, they're already tracking them. They're giving practically hourly updates. Remember what I said earlier? An hour could possibly be all that it takes for the hurricane to shift a couple of feet even probably. And now all of a sudden a completely different city in another state or in the same state is now in jeopardy. She goes on to say, "Coming here and blaming the victims or a political party for this is a good way to get yourself blocked. I've had my fill of small-minded people and y'all are really pushing it," end quote. And quite frankly, I don't blame her because some people get so beside themselves. They're very prideful and arrogant, disrespectful and rude. They think they know it all in a situation or concerning a situation they have not been through or are not going through. They have the audacity to tell somebody else what they should have done, when we all know they would have been in the same situation with everybody else if it were them. So I don't blame them because, like I said, people be getting beside themselves on these little social media apps. Now, she did also post, once again, how there were organizations and churches that were coming together, putting their money together, either from inside those same cities or from cities within the state that didn't quite get impacted, putting their money together to get some kind of resources, toiletries, water, non-perishables that they could ship to these people. They usually put it on like an 18-wheeler or a truck, so to speak. Once again, I've seen all this play out because I've been through this before. I know exactly how this is. They put this stuff on trucks and they try to ship it to people where they are, find some kind of way. And yet sometimes, like they mentioned before, they do have to use stuff like helicopters because certain places are so flooded and basically isolated because of the damage to the roads. That's the only route that they could take now. Now, remember what I said, the wind and sometimes the water pushing objects like cars into trees, into telephone poles, into electrical poles, knocking stuff down. This is what I was talking about. And another thing that people didn't think about is all that water caused a mudslide. It caused a landslide that also caused damage to streets, to property, that caused people to have to take detours wherever they're trying to go. Now, this other person on Twitter posted, and I quote, "Chimney Rock, North Carolina is essentially gone," in all caps. It looks post-apocalyptic, and the mainstream media and White House are practically ignoring it. WTF, in all caps, with a question mark. And once again, remember what happened down there in Texas. When Texas froze over and the grid was out of whack and people were almost freezing in their homes, and I believe it was either the governor or whoever he was, Ted Cruz, was basically like, well, I ain't got to stay in Texas just because, 80% of y'all can't afford to leave, and just left Texas and basically went to Cancun or something and was living like it was golden, while the people who he had a responsibility over, because that's what you are as a governor or some kind of ruling body, ruling individual over a state, you have a responsibility to those people. He basically was just like, oh, well, I ain't got to suffer with y'all, and then blamed his children. I keep telling y'all, these politicians in the government, Don't put your faith and trust in them. They're raggedy. Anyways, look at this. This person took a video of this. I can't tell if that's the ground that the debris is covering or if that's water that's covering where the houses used to be. That's what it looked like. It looks like water now that I'm taking a closer look. Yes, it's water covering where the houses used to be and the debris of the houses that the houses were made out of floating in it. Now, there was another young lady on Twitter that basically said, check your privilege, to all those people, once again, who were saying, why didn't y'all leave? Why didn't you this, that? And I quote, the assumption that everybody has a car, an airport nearby, friends or a family to stay with, money for a hotel or gas, which they price gouge massively for during hurricanes, is so indicative of the dream world of privilege many of you live in. And she reposted a picture of somebody that had posted a picture. This person is saying this part, and they're reposting a picture of this young lady who is basically saying, and I quote, everyone's mad at us for not evacuating, but no one is telling us where to evacuate to. And I'm going to interject in that the fact that they had to even evacuate to begin with. Didn't nobody tell these people that they had to go anywhere? Nobody warned them of what was about to happen. Once again, it's real hard to evacuate for a hurricane you didn't know was about to hit you. You didn't know how bad it was going to be. You're not prepared for it because you don't get hit by hurricanes in the state that you're in. It's real hard to evacuate for something you have no inkling is really coming at you the way that it is. This young lady also posted on her picture, and I quote, not everyone has a house in Texas or $200 for hotel stays, and I had to work until 9 last night, end quote. People didn't think about that either. There were people, not only were they not warned, but they actually had to be at a job somewhere, either working a graveyard shift overnight till night when the hurricane was about to come. There are people who they don't get to leave their jobs. It's not that kind of job. People keep forgetting about this kind of stuff. And once again, speaking on that price gouging and not having money to go and evacuate, again, people don't be thinking about how there are some people who cannot even afford to leave their houses. Y'all have seen these gas prices. Y'all have seen these hotel prices. And yet there are some places that are motels that, they offer very small rates, but they're not, the best places. It's better than no place at all and being stuck at home in the middle of a natural disaster. But people don't think about these aspects. And the fact that, yes, there are some companies who will price gouge because they know, all these people from the southern states or from these southern cities are coming up here to get away from this natural disaster. Let's raise our prices a little bit so we can get some more money, which is disgusting. It's very disgusting to take advantage of people like that. Now, that's the opposite side of that humanity I was talking about. You have the people that's helping, and then you have the people that's taking advantage. Those are the people that's taking advantage. And best believe for all them people out there taking advantage of these people, price gouging them while they're trying to escape a natural disaster they have no control over, God is going to hold them accountable. When they stand before him and he asks them, why did you raise the prices when you knew those people were trying to get away? If anything, you should have lowered them to help people. They're going to have to answer for that. So, like I said, for all them people that's doing that, y'all keep that in mind. And once again, the young lady was talking about, there are some people who don't have family or friends who they can stay with. Some people are literally on their own by themselves. Some people don't have a car. They literally take the bus everywhere they go regularly. So literally, where would they go? How would they get there? Unless they can catch a bus at the last minute, which in a last minute effort, how is that going to work? So again, all these aspects that people don't think about, we need to be thinking about them. Now, there was somebody on Twitter who also brought up a very valid point. And I quote, if people fled Florida, they would have most likely fled to Georgia, South Carolina, and North Carolina, the areas that got hit real bad. It was a no-win situation for a lot of folks, end quote. And this is a harsh reality for a lot of people. Another person on Twitter said, and I quote, my parents did just that, ran to one of my aunt's houses in North Carolina, still got messed up in her place, still without power and water, wasted time, money, and gas, just to be in the same boat that they would have been if they stayed home, end quote. Now, that is a sad reality. Once again, some people left one state, one city to go to another one to escape the same storm they ended up getting messed up by in another state, in another city. But somebody underneath him did bring up a valid point. He said, and I quote, they might be deceased if they stayed home. A bunch of rain and flooding is not the same as high winds and rain and flooding, end quote. Now, I'm not here to compare which is worse than which. There are certain things that flooding will do that wind won't, and vice versa. And sometimes, unfortunately, you have the combination of both. Although, with as bad as it hit Florida, there's no telling what could have happened to that young man's parents. There's no telling with their particular situation, with their house, where their place was located. It could have actually been worse if they had stayed. That is something that people have to think about. Speaking of another thing to think about, there have been looters running around, allegedly, according to some of the North Carolina residents, vandalizing things, stealing things, not because of necessity, but because of their own personal gain. And I quote, "There were some truckers coming in with supplies and medical stuff trying to help us people slash their tires at the rest stop. The roads are completely blocked off. You're not getting out. If you have a weapon, keep it on you because there are people intentionally sabotaging stuff," end quote. So basically there are looters out there taking advantage of the situation to try and get either more stuff for themselves, to try and even like monopolize, I would even say, go so far to say that, try to hoard things instead of just allowing the people who are trying to help everybody. They want to take more than what it's worth. It's kind of like, again, this stuff happens in these kind of situations. There are evil people out there who are inhumane, who will take advantage of that situation for their own greedy benefit. Now, there is somebody on Twitter, he made a valid point. He said, and I quote, "If I have no water and I walk into an abandoned grocery store under these circumstances, I'm probably walking out with water. But if we're talking about opportunist looters that are going into houses or otherwise taking advantage of a tragedy, I have nothing in my heart for you," end quote. And I do understand that. If there's a store that has been abandoned, God forbid it's partially flooded out, and your child is starving, or you are without water, you're without resources, you don't know how you're going to make it, and you come across that abandoned store and you're thinking, I don't really want to do this, God forgive me, but I don't see how else I'm going to make it. And like he said, you leave with some resources. I can understand that because you're just trying to survive at the end of the day. But if you're the type that throws bricks through windows to take TVs, flat screens, and tennis shoes, no, we don't understand that. That's unacceptable. Or if you're going to other people and taking what they have when you know they're in the same boat as you, so to speak, that's trash raggedy. It's unacceptable and it's inhumane. Now, there was on Reddit somebody who actually posted the picture of the person that I was telling you about. If I'm not mistaken, it was a grandfather, a grandmother, their daughter, and their granddaughter. It was like 6 years old. Like I said before, this is very triggering. This is very heartbreaking. The water rose all the way up practically to their roof. This allegedly was the last picture that was taken by the daughter, if I'm not mistaken, before the roof collapsed. And unfortunately, all of them except for the daughter drowned, including the 6-year-old grandchild. There were people saying, like this young lady, that she had a daughter who was 6. She could not imagine watching that happen to her daughter in that situation. It's very sad. Once again, let's be very, very mindful of what is going on. We all live in this country together. We may as well look out for each other. Send supplies if you can send supplies. Let other people know ways that they can donate and give. If there's GoFundMes, Cash Apps, organizations. Like I said, there are some people who have actually gotten in their own cars. They actually have trucks, U-Hauls. They stack up with food and they just take a trip down there. Now, if you're on the other side of the country, you might not be able to do that. But I'm sure there's some kind of way that you can donate. Be mindful of those. Send up prayers. If there's nothing else you can do, and even if you did everything else, don't forget to pray as well. Pray for these people. Pray for their safety. Pray for their sanity. Pray that something can happen, that the government, will be forced to do something to help them, to give them resources, money to rebuild their homes. Help them. Pray that God helps them emotionally because they're going to need everything. They're going to need it all. Anyways, y'all let me know what y'all think about all of this down in the comments below respectfully. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Y'all all have a very blessed, beautiful, and safe day.